Brought to you by...
Hello friends, and welcome back to some bite-sized reviews here on ETF. It's been a while since I've been able to make one of these, and I'm excited to be diving back into short films in a much bigger way. A lot of these little gems never get the chance to really be appreciated by a wider audience, so I like to check them out whenever I can. This time, in the spirit of the season, I wanted to look at a few brief tales of terror that did something a little different with the tropes of the holidays. Beginning with a tradition that I myself grew up with, the creepy and watchful eye of Santa himself, that came into our homes during the Christmas season, threatening to report our misdeeds to the big man himself. In this little black comedy nightmare, a man buys an elf on the shelf from a thrift store that turns out to bring more into the home of him and his roommates than he could have bargained for. This one was broken up into the span of several days and nights, exploring the horrors that began to unfold over a period of time since the protagonist acquired the elf. Playing out in a very tongue-in-cheek, comical way, making jokes at the filmmaker's expense, even directly breaking the fourth wall at one point. Given that this is made on a pretty small budget with minimal crew and actors, the film looks pretty great, and the performances are solid. The audio mix could have been a little stronger in my opinion, but it's forgivable. I like the inclusion of some dynamic, almost hyper-transitional shots during the gingerbread house scene. The comedy in this one lands really well, with well-timed jokes and character interactions that blend well into the dialogue and action. The timing of many of the edits is absolutely hilarious, making the whole film feel incredibly well-paced. One decision I didn't quite agree with this one was the choice to utilize all copywritten music from various mainstream sources, including the soundtracks of Insidious and Jordan Peele's Us, as well as the discographies of Eminem and NWA. Personally, I think you could have done without these elements, but I have to admit they do smack hard into the comedic beats in the best way. Personally, this is a really enjoyable little horror experience with some hilarious moments throughout. I'm giving Elf on the Shelf an A. Next up, we are introduced to two elves, held up in isolation, slaving away on toys for Christmas, desperate to escape the tyranny of their all-knowing master. Shot on the Panasonic GH5S with Lumix 12-35mm f2.8 and Olympus 60mm macro lenses, and written, directed, shot, edited, and produced by Kent Lamb. We are immediately greeted by a winter storm as we come upon our protagonists through a frosty window pane as they hunker down inside where it's warm. Right from the start, this film is gorgeously lit and captured with beautiful, shallow depth of field. The angles that the film chooses are very interesting, making the most of this small, isolated set. A choice was made early on to have our characters not speak openly to one another, having them communicate through sign language and close whispers, in order to play more into this idea of Santa as this all-knowing, omnipresent being. This motif is carried forward even when Santa makes himself present, giving this intention to make the story without dialogue. I love that at first, these seem like just two women held up in a cabin in a snowy tundra, but they subtly reveal that they are elves, working away in isolation on toys for the Christmas rush. This one delivers a dark and twisted vision of what a horrific being Santa could be if he were real, keeping innocent beings like elves as slaves to do his bidding, making them feel trapped and isolated in their servitude to him, and even threatening them with a fate worse than death if they speak ill of him. I'm giving The Little Helpers a B-. And finally, today we have a frightful little number called Warmth. This one was winner of Best Student Film at the Southern Shorts Awards Spring of 2022, and took official selection at the Something Wicked Film Festival, Monster Flicks Awards, Sozo Bear Presents A Night at the Movies, and the Georgia Film Festival. Written and directed by Chandler Thornton, Warmth sees a paranormal investigator go to a house where a woman claims to have been frightened terrifyingly by something that came crawling down her chimney, and she has been too scared to go back since. Right off the bat with this one, I noticed a harsh contrast and oversaturation in the color correction. This contrast was honestly a bit distracting. What felt like it should have had a more muted, flat, and retro look came across like a gritty, almost early 2000s low-budget zombie movie look. This look made the film far too warm for a winter-based film than I would normally like. But I think the intention was to make the blacks and shadows true black, which they are, but almost too much so. We are introduced to our protagonist as he arrives at the setting, an average run-of-the-mill house, as we hear a voiceover recording of a conversation he had with the owner about something she experienced in the house. These early moments of the film are slowly paced, building up the atmosphere a bit as the story gradually develops through these recordings that the character is listening back to. The score here is kept minimal, and I found myself wishing for some more prominent, haunting tones to build the dread. These types of tones do begin to gradually get introduced as the film moves along, but I do wish they had been more utilized to aid these recordings in setting up the tension and dread early on. That being said, the sound design that starts to become introduced as things begin to kick off is well executed and helps set the tone for what is to come quite well. They made the decision to never show us the entity that the film is building toward in any great detail. From what I could make of it, it looked like a generic Halloween mask, but it was smartly kept out of focus for its brief moment on screen. Ultimately, this one didn't land as well for me. It felt like a generic short that we have seen so many times at this point, and the Christmas setting didn't really play into the narrative in any great detail, other than that the entity emerges from a fireplace. I'm gonna give Warmth a C-. This definitely isn't one of the best that we've ever covered on the channel, but it's also nowhere near the worst. So I would definitely recommend checking it out if you come across it. With that, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you enjoyed this one, I hope you stick around for more bite-sized reviews in the future. If you feel so inclined with the holiday spirit this year, please consider supporting ETF over on Patreon. I hope you all stay safe, have a Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays.